Let's start in the 80s and just talk a little bit about, you were a journalist in the 80s. Yes. What was the significance of drug money on Colombia?
I think it was starting to get involved in the market, because I think one of the things that has happened in Colombia is that the business has changed. If you go back to the 70s, we started with the marijuana, and Colombia was #1 marijuana in the world. That's what people said, that, and it was captured in the US markets as a #1 product. In the 80s, they changed from the marijuana to the cocaine, and from the 90s, they changed from the cocaine to the heroin. So it has been a business that, in the case of Colombians, drug lords, they had the vision of changing the vision depending the demands of the United States or the demands of the world. And that's why it has been so difficult to end this business. So in the 70s, I think, starting the 70s, marijuana was the #1 product. And in the 80s, we have all the flow of money, of cocaine into Colombia. But it has never been, as people imagine, that our economy, the base of our economy is drugs. I think you may said that not more than 2 to 3% of the GNP or GDP of this country has been of money from drugs. We're talking about $100 billion GDP. Not more than 2-3% has been drug money.
So how does that compare to coffee, flowers?
Oh no, it's completely, coffee has been, now we have coffee, because even at the time could be not as high, because now we have coffee, now we have oil, now we have coal, and now we're exporting, like in the case of flowers. So it has been every year less and less, the importance of drugs in our economy. I think it has never been that important in our economy. And that's why sometimes I've said that we have to compare the business of drugs in the world. You know that drugs could be #1 business in the world. All the figures that you read and you see in different studies and media and information is that drugs could be $500 billion business. So we are talking about the largest business in the world, and we are fighting the largest crime organization in the world. And I think sometimes people don't realize, and that's why we're asking the world, help us. Because this is not a Colombian problem, or Bolivia, or Peru, or not even only the United States. And that's why we are proposing to fight together this crime organization that is the largest one in the world.
What can you accomplish now that you haven't ever been able to accomplish, or that we haven't been able to accomplish in the past?
At this moment, what?
Well, we have an aid package moving slowly through Washington.
I think one thing that is very important in this aid package, the first thing, and we hope to accomplish now, if we have the aid of the United States Congress and the United States government, is for the first time having money to spend in the people. Social investment. Because even you see backwards, the largest amount of money sent to Colombia by the United States was 1 year ago, $230 million. But all that aid was involved, and since, if you go back all the years since the United States started helping Colombia or giving some money to Colombia to fight drugs, all the money has been involved only on military aid to fight narco trafficking. Now for the first time we have like $300 million that are going to be invested in social development, alternative development, in strengthening our institutions, human rights, displacement. So I think that could be the first real big achievement of Colombia, creating this conscience in the United States.
Americans are interested in, or being sold a package that will stop the flow of drugs into the United States.
It's impossible.
That's the appeal.
Yes.
And why should they invest in social structure in Colombia?
Because it's the only way of getting rid of the problem. What happened is that if you don't give our peasants a legal crop that could give them the same, or at least try to give them the same money that they could earn monthly, it's impossible to eradicate drugs in this country. Because you have to see in Colombia, do you have the 1 hectare or the 2 hectare coca cultivation, but you also could see the 100 or 200 hectare coca cultivation. We could destroy that through fumigation or eradication. We could work in those largest projects to try to eradicate these large extensions of illicit crops like cocaine. But what are you going to do with this guy that it's this peasant that has 1 hectare or 2 hectares? You have to give him an alternative so that he could earn money for them and for the family, for the monthly way of living. So that's why we are asking the states, look, we have to think, how can we get out of this problem by alternative development? But there are also, you could fight the drugs, I think, 3 or 4 different ways. But at the end, you have to put all of them together. One of them is fumigation and eradication. Definitely, it's one. Sometimes it's criticized around the world that how much drugs are we really getting rid with fumigation or eradication? It's that program, a program that has been effective. We are destroying, last year we destroyed almost 60,000 hectares of coca and almost 12,000 hectares of poppy fields. Imagine if we didn't eradicate those crops, what was happening in the market? Maybe consumption get higher. So I think that's one of the ways of getting rid of the drug problem. The other one is alternative development, investing in alternative crops. And the other one is controlling the precursors, the chemicals. And that's why we were asking Europe, you need to help us. Because if you want to produce cocaine, you need the coca plant or the coca leaf. But also if you want to produce cocaine, you need the ether or the acetone. And many of these chemicals, or almost all these chemicals, come from Europe. And that's why we're saying to the Europeans, you need to help us. At least control these precursors, and I think that we could avoid producing a lot of drugs in our country.
Americans look at this situation and say, well, there was the Medellin cartel. There's no longer a Medellin cartel. There was a Cali cartel. The Rodriguez Orjuelas are in prison. But nothing has reduced the availability of cocaine in the United States. So why will we succeed now? Why should we believe that we can succeed now when we haven't succeeded in the past, even though we've taken out major criminal organizations?
I think that we've taken some steps that could be important. As you know, many times in these drugs organizations or criminal organizations, if you get rid of the head, many times they open in different branches or arms, and sometimes it's even more difficult to control. But I think, for example, that what happened during my government, we have captured in Operation Millennium, for example, 60% of the whole operation that was sending drugs, basically cocaine, to the United States. I think that was one of big triumphs of the police, of anti-narcotic police of this country. I think that the U.S. should do more in controlling inside their borders, and inside also the United States, because it's amazing the flow of drugs that is going to the United States. 2 weeks ago, we captured 5.5 tons of cocaine. You're talking $250 million, not in the street market, but in the market in the United States. In the last 2 weeks, I think that we have captured almost 10 tons of cocaine. There's a lot of flow of cocaine back to the States, and now it's getting a new route to Europe. But I think that for the first time, I think there has been in the case of Colombia, for the first time, I think the whole state of Colombia, the whole country, is working and trying to get rid of drugs. The government, the police, the armed forces, for the first time, the Navy, for example, is controlling the rivers. The Air Force is controlling the airspace, and the Army are working together. All the intelligence departments in the country are working together. And I think that you could see that in the results that we're having of capturing and destroying labs, capturing criminal organizations. But I think that that's why we need each day to get more united in this fight. The states should do its part, we should do ours, but at the end, we should unite all the efforts to eradicate this problem. In the case of our country, that it's the one that is financing the violence. Unfortunately, drugs is financing guerrillas, drugs is financing the paramilitaries, drugs is financing the common violence of this country, and that's why it's our common enemy. The worst enemy of the peace process in Colombia, it's narco trafficking.
a lot of points I want to follow up on here. The Millennium operation is a big operation, but yet no change in the availability of drugs in the United States as a result of it. What do we gain when we take out an organization like that? It seems like, to the average American viewer, we don't gain anything.
I don't think that we should go to the extreme, because and those are some of the figures that are given by the United States. If these people were in charge of getting 60% of the drugs of cocaine into the United States, I think it was a big triumph. I don't know at the end it's the U.S. doing inside. We have done our part, was capturing the crime organization. What's happening there inside themselves to try to capture all the drug that is going into the United States, and that's why I think we need to follow their efforts. I think that question is more than for the United States and for Colombia, because if we have captured the organization, and for example, what happened last week, we know there's a lot of labs in this country, but we destroyed in 1 month 152 labs in the northern part of Colombia, in the Operación Motilón. So I think we're doing our part, but we need more help, because we don't have the money to go after the largest business in the world, that is drugs. And that's why we need to unite all our efforts.
Who's the biggest trafficker of drugs in Colombia now?
I think now you have, like, you may say, small cartels. That's the information that we have, that after capturing the heads of the cartels, I think the operation has gone to small cartels that are doing the operation inside.
How do you define the FARC's involvement in cocaine?
I've said that I don't think the FARC is a narco-guerrilla movement, as the one that it's. I've said that the FARC, I don't think, is a cartel, that it's involved in the business as a cartel in the real sense of the word. I've said that, unfortunately, the FARC, and not only the FARC, as I said before, the paramilitaries and the violence of this country is financed by drugs. Why? Because or they ask taxes or the FARC gain money from drugs from taxes, or earn money from the guerrilla because it controls some of the areas where these illicit crops are grown, because they tax each ton of cocaine or each kilo of cocaine that is going from outside from Colombia. So they're earning a lot of money from drugs, but I don't think that they're directly involved in the business of drug as a cartel.
I get contrary information from many members of your administration. It seems to be an open secret in Bogota that you know that the FARC is involved in narco trafficking, but yet it's damaging to the peace process to do.
One thing, I want to be clear as the voice and the head of the government. If I thought that FARC was a narco cartel, I will never start a dialogue with any narcotic organization or drug lord in this country. We are not going to talk to drug lords. We're not going to talk and have an arrangement with narco trafficking. That's the #1 enemy of this country. And as I said before, the FARC, they gain money from the guerrillas, and we know it from the drug lords. As the same thing is happening with the paramilitaries or the common violence of this country. But I don't think that I've said very clear. I don't think, if I really thought that the FARC was one of the cartels of this country, I will never start a peace process with these type of organizations.
Many people in Bogota that are in a position to know what the FARC is doing say that they are in fact trafficking in drugs, but that they can't say that publicly.
We don't have the evidence. If someone has the evidence, I think it's the important thing to get it out, and that's what we are saying. If there's the real evidence of them involved directly in the business, let us know. But I think, as I said before, they earn, and they have said it, 60 or 70% of their own earnings come from taxes and earnings from drugs. They have said that. This is not something new in this country.
How many millions of dollars do they derive from drug trade?
The figures is between $1 to $2 million a day.
I think the figure that McCaffrey has quoted is up to 800 million. So it's
about, yes, it's about, I think 500, yes, 500. We don't have that, but that's the figure that we know or that we manage in Colombia.
We went to the CIA,
yes,
for an on-the-record briefing, and we said, run the numbers. What could they possibly be deriving if they're simply taxing the crop?
Yes.
the CIA came up with a figure of 100, maybe as much as 200 million. They said that there's no way that given the amount of money that the crop is worth, this is the CIA, that those numbers, 500 to 800 million, could be real unless they're involved in trafficking. And so I come here and I find out, indeed, many people in a position to know say they are involved in trafficking.
We don't have the evidence. I think that the figure depends. Because, for example, the other day, depends how you manage the figure. Because, for example, 5.5 tons of cocaine in Colombia could cost, I don't know, what's the price of the kilo? $5,000 a kilo here. If you take it into the United States, it's $25,000 a kilo. But if you put it in the streets of the United States, it's, I don't know, $50,000, something. That depends the figure. But what we have, the idea of the figures that we're managing is more or less that, between $1 to $2 million a day. No? And we don't have the evidence. We know, and they have said it, not only the FARC, even the paramilitaries. They've said that most of their earnings come from drugs. And regarding the U.S. market, I think is the price that it put to the cocaine. I think that could be between $1 to $2 million a day. But that's a lot of money in Colombia. If that is a lot of money in the United States, imagine in Colombia, $1 to $2 million a day that is used to buy arms, to create terrorism, to do what they're doing many times in this country. And that's why we think, and that's why we even asked the FARC, Martin, that one of the first things they have to do in a peace process is showing the international community that they are not involved in the drug business. And if you remember that when I had the first meeting in the jungle with Marulanda, I asked him, are you willing to go to the United States and yourself, with someone of the FARC, said to the U.S. government that you are really committed in the eradication of illicit crops in this country? And they said yes. And you remember that we had one meeting in Costa Rica between the State Department and the FARC. That unfortunately, it was known because it was a secret meeting, but the purpose of the meeting was the commitment of the FARC to the United States saying, we want to eradicate illicit crops in Colombia. And the same thing, no, look what happened. The 29th of June, we're going to have the international meeting between the FARC government and the countries that we're inviting to San Vicente Caguán to get the commitment of the FARC in the eradication of illicit crops. And that's the first conference, international conference between government, FARC, and the international community, because that's what they want. The FARC want to show to the international community that they are really committed in the eradication of drugs.
Well, they can say they are, and perhaps they have a PR problem if they say if they admit that they are getting money from drugs. But based on what I know from the CIA, what I have to believe is that they're involved in more than simply the taxation of the crops. But let's move on.
Okay.
Are you proposing that the U.S. aid package, putting aside the social programs,
yes,
the military aid, is that going to be used then to defeat the FARC?
No. I've said something, Martin, is very clear. I don't consider this as a military aid. It's an anti-narcotics aid. And that's why you remember when I started my government, since August of 1998, my proposal was to create special battalions dedicated to fight hand by hand with the police in the eradication of drugs in this country. And that's why we're asking money for this anti-narcotics battalion. We have trained now 1,000 men. We hope to have 1,000 more men trained this year, and we hope to, in the next 3 years, to have between 4,000 to 5,000 men in this anti-narcotics battalion. These are vetted units in human rights and corruption. And all the aid that is coming to the Army is going to this type of battalions. It's not going to the Army as an army. They're going to these special battalions to be used in the anti-narcotics operation of this country. But if we agree that the FARC sometimes maybe be involved in controlling some of this or taking care of some of the areas in which we're going to eradicate it, and we have a confrontation between the army or the police and the people that are down taking control of these crops, and if they're guerrillas, they are going to be used against them because we are defending our people. But it's not an aid that it's directly going to be involved in fighting in contra-guerrilla operations of the Colombian army.
But it will bring you into armed conflict with the
If
guerrilla.
they are involved in drugs, yes.
Now, your concerns are stability of this country, prosperity of this country. Your concerns are not the health of the United States. The United States has a health problem, drug consumption, drug abuse.
Yes.
But your concerns must have, as president of this country, have to primarily be prosperity and stability.
That's right, and what is happening in our country. And also we are having a problem of consumption. I've said that. Now you have to be aware that in Colombia, we always thought that we were an export country of drugs. Now we're a consuming country also. So we're starting to have a problem. But our main, really, our main problem right now is how all this business, that it's not our problem, really, because it's not a Colombian-only problem. It's a world problem. And we're getting the bad part of this thing. The money. Where's the money? If this is a $500 billion business, who is getting the money?
Isn't it true, though, that in the early 80s, when the rest of Latin America was in recession, that narco dollars floated the economy here?
No, I don't think so. As I said to you before, Colombia, only to give you some figures, Colombia was considered one of the strongest economies of the world. If you see the IDP figures, since 1925 to 1997, the average growth of Colombia was 3.5%. So this was a country that was growing and growing. If you see what happened in the what was called the lost decade of Latin America, that was the 80s, Colombia was the only country that grew. We never had hyperinflation. We never failed to pay our foreign debt, never. We have never failed to pay the private sector. So Colombia has been considered a very stable economy in the world. But because of what has been happening in this country, of the managing of the macroeconomy in Colombia. So that's why I think now, not only the private sector, the private banks, but the multiracial banks are giving the hand to Colombia because they know that this is a serious country in which we have been managing our economy very seriously in the last 75 years.
And drug dollars, you don't think, contributed to helping the economy?
But I cannot say that not only the 80s and the 90s. I'm not saying that in a way it helped in a way the economy in Colombia, but not as many people imagine that it was the center and the base of the growing of this country. That's not true. You could see problems. You could see what happened, for example, in Cali, that they got involved in housing, and they construct in the last 5 years a lot of buildings, a lot of houses, and it was an important part of the economy of the city at that time because of the boom of construction. And you could see that in different areas of the country. But what I want to point out is that Colombia is not a narco economy. That we export, we are the largest, now we're going to be the second largest export of coal in the world. We are exporting oil at this moment. We are one of the largest export of coffee. We are one of the largest flowers exporters. So we have our economy based on a real economy and not on a narco economy, on drug money.
One of the things that's confusing in the United States is that the aid package is said to go to help fight drugs. Americans are very skeptical that drugs can be fought abroad. We tried it through the 80s and the 90s, and there was no change. There's another reason that many Americans believe we're fighting here, and that is to prevent Colombia from imploding as a state, from becoming a failed state. And that scares people because they of course, think of Vietnam and wonder where we're going here. And as you sell it to Congress, when you come to Washington, you talk about how it will bring us into conflict with that money will be used to fight the guerrilla here. It's a confusing mix that we wonder, are we really fighting drugs, or is it really the State Department's initiative to prevent Colombia from collapsing? Which is it?
I think it goes together. If you have this type of criminal organization financing the war in this country, it's very difficult to really have a real future in Colombia. And that's why I've said before, the drugs is the #1 enemy of this country, because it's the one that is creating and financing all the violence in Colombia. But secondly, sometimes you have to say, because people are saying, okay, in the United States, they're saying, we are going to give $1.6 billion to Colombia. You know how much money we spent every year in this country on drugs? $1.3 billion. To try to avoid the drug to go to the U.S. streets. The easy thing for me and for my government is having those $1.3 billion invested in housing, in water sewage, in giving health to my people, instead to avoiding the drug going to the United States. We are a very poor country, and we're expending $1.3 billion a year. In the Colombia plan, we are asking, in Plan Colombia, $7.5 billion in the next 3 years. We are putting $4.5 billion. If I use that money, instead in fighting drugs, instead of avoiding drugs going to the street of the United States, maybe the thing's different. I could have a lot of housing, more health, more education for people. But we know that we are in a problem, a world problem, and that's what we are asking the US and Europe and the world to fight together this war that at the end, it could destroy Colombia, it could destroy the future of the United States, that is the young people, it could destroy the future of Europe, that is also young people. So instead of pointing out, hey, look, I'm going to give you money, it's your problem, it's my problem, it's demand, it's the offer, I think it's time to put all the efforts together to get rid of this common enemy that is narco-trafficking.
And you'll defeat many Colombians, yourself included. It's demand. It's demand in the United States that drives this whole thing. Why not take that $1.6 billion and spend it on reducing demand in the United States? Why wouldn't that be a good idea?
You're expending like how many billions are in the United States? Because you could expand in the United States, but I don't know if it could be that effective.
But it's never been effective here. We've never been effective in spending money here.
You cannot say that, because imagine if we destroy 60,000 hectares of cocaine last year, imagine if we didn't destroy those hectares. Imagine if we don't have our airplanes of the Air Force controlling our space. Imagine if we don't have the army or the police controlling drugs. How much drug could arrive to the U.S. market? And you never realize that. How much drug we control in this country, avoiding them, not only drugs, but our own money, putting in controlling drug to avoid the drug to go to the United States.
The drug dealers that I've talked to,
yes,
ex-drug dealers that I've talked to, say there's so much surplus in the system that if you knock out that many hectares or bust a lot of loads, it doesn't really make much difference because there's so much inventory in the system.
Okay.
The fact is that over time we've tried a lot of eradication, we've tried a lot of interdiction, we've tried the kingpin strategy. Nothing has seemed to work.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think as we have talked, these people are really involved in the largest business, and if this is the largest business in the world, is because these people, they are really knowing how to work the business together. But I think that, and that's why I said before, if we try to propose a new way of eradication, we have never proposed alternative development. We never had resources for that, never. So I think for the first time we could try to develop pilot projects or experiment projects in alternative development. Only to give you one figure, for example, Colombia is very competitive in palm oil. And if you see in the map of Colombia, the places in which have the largest cocaine crops is the one in which the palm oil could be planted. And Colombia could be very competitive in that area. So for the first time, I think that we need to to really go to the bottom problem, saying how can we eradicate, not through fumigation, but through alternative development. And second, I think that if the guerrilla is really committed in eradicating drugs, we will advance a lot. That is going to be another method of trying to eradicate. If they are really committed, saying we are not going to allow in Colombia to plant one more plant of cocaine, and we are going to eradicate these largest cultivations, I think that could be another important step in getting rid of coca and poppy in my country.
Do you believe the FARC? Do you believe the paramilitaries when they tell you that they want to eradicate coca?
I think the FARC, what I have talked to Marulanda, is that they're really committed. Sometimes people ask me the same question: why a guerrilla that is earning $1 million a day or $2 million? And it's the question that all the media ask me in the United States. I said, and I think I'm not the speaker of the FARC, but my feeling is that if the FARC want to get into a peace process, it's because they want to get into a democratic process. They want to run municipalities. And I hope that they could win a lot of municipalities. And they will know the real problem of managing a big or a small city. But at the same time, if they are really committed, if they want to get involved in this political process, because I think there's a space in the country for the leftist groups in Colombia. And this is something, Martin, that this is not new. In Colombia, if you see historically, between 7 to 12% has been votes to the left groups in this country. So they know they have a political space that they could occupy. But if they want to occupy that political space, the first signal that they have to send to the international community is we are not involved in drugs. Because otherwise, never they will be recognized in the international community.
Yes, but that's public relations. That's not reality.
No. I think that what is going to happen at the end of June in Colombia, with this international meeting in which they want to show their commitment in eradication, I think is going to be a very important first step in this process.
Well, at least it gives you something to hold them to. The black peso money exchange phenomenon.
Sí.
Has that been beneficial to the U.S. economy? You now import more from us than.
That's one of the things that we start doing since my inauguration day, is that it's controlling contraband. Because the largest money laundering industry in this world is the U.S. industry and the Japanese industry.
Explain.
Cigarettes, electrical equipment, liquors, textiles. So why we have contraband? Because of the black peso. So that's why one of the first things we're doing is controlling contraband, because it's the way of controlling money laundering in the United States and basically in the Korean and the Japanese market also. Now, for example, we have signed agreements with British Tobacco, controlling contraband. We have signed agreements with Sony Corporation, for example, and we want to sign agreements with the other electric corporations of Japan and some of the United States, that they are going to sell equipment or their own products to legal distributors in Colombia. And now if you see the figures of how come we have a fight contraband, it has been very important not only to create jobs in Colombia and defend our own industry, but also it has been very important not only for the United States, because we have, even in the case of cigarettes, if you see the figures, the national markets grew a lot. We have more taxes. We have more money for the government. So I think this is also something that is going to be an example for different countries of the world. And I think that that's going to be very important also if we want to hit money laundering outside or in the United States or in other countries.
Are you satisfied that the big companies in the United States are cooperating in compliance?
Oh, yes. And I think, I've said, this is a fight that we cannot win alone. We need the help and the support of many people in many industries, in many governments, in many things. We need the support of many people.
I guess I need if you could just give me a full explanation of how these companies in America have responsibility, because I don't think most Americans understand that drug dollars actually come into the legitimate economy.
That's right. It's a way. It's very simple. For example, if you have dollars in the United States, and they pay you here in pesos, what happens is that, for example, you go on and you buy, I don't know how many packages of cigarettes. $1 that you buy in the States is 20, 30, 50, 60 pesos lower than in Colombia. So when you bring the cigarettes in Colombia with contraband and sell those cigarettes in Colombia in a different price, the dollar is paid different, it's going to be a lot of earnings for these people here. And it's a way not of bringing dollars, but bringing products into Colombia in a dollar pay, in a very low price, and here is going to be paid in a very high price. So it's a way of really laundering money, and I think it's the #1 way of laundering money in the case of Colombia. That is contraband. And that's why we are very involved in eradicating and fighting contraband.
And it's very important to the international tobacco companies. They make a lot of money from it. So how can they really stop? I mean, they can't control and police every distributor.
No, yes, we have, and I think, Martin, could be important if you talk to Fanny Kurzman. Oh, you talked to Fanny. Okay, you did. Okay. Why control it with, for example, sometimes we have agreements of putting the names of the country in the cigarettes, so avoiding them coming through the Caribbean or coming through some parts of Europe. So it was a way of trying to get control of these things. Signing agreements between Colombia and the distributors, for example, giving the guarantee only to those products sold by legal distributors. Because what happened is that you could find here a TV in Colombia, in some places, even a lower price than in the United States. Lower price than in the United States. So now, but they don't give you a guarantee. So, for example, one of this company, what they're saying is you only have the guarantee if it's sold in a legal store, and we will give you the guarantee. So what they're doing is putting numbers so they know in which country is that TV and who is selling that TV, because many of them come through Panama, then many of them come through Europe. So now that we have a way of controlling them. So at the same time, it's a way of getting more resources for the state, legalizing all these products, as for example, cigarette, and you could see now results in Colombia, not only that are good for the companies, for the private sector, but also are good for the government because we have more resources right now.
Why should we come down here? Nothing else has ever worked. Military intervention. We took out Noriega. It didn't change anything. We've taken out Haiti. We intervened militarily in Haiti. It didn't produce any good results there. Haiti is now one of the greatest transshipment points for cocaine out of Colombia in the world. Panama is still very active in the black peso exchange. And so what's military intervention going to do here? And aren't we going to look at another?
No, first of all, there's not going to be a military intervention in Colombia. While I am president of Colombia, there will never be a foreign intervention, military intervention in this country. Because even, I think there are two things that impact me when I see TV or read newspaper in the United States. First of all, is that they try to compare Colombia with Vietnam. And this is not a Vietnam. You have 50% of this country, 60% of this country supporting Viet Congs, the FARC, or the guerrilla as a whole. If you see the polls, not more than 4% of the Colombian people support guerrillas. So first of all, this is not Vietnam, and that's something they have to be very clear. Secondly, people, when I read the newspaper, they said, Colombia is in a civil war. This is not a civil war. If a civil war, you have to have a country divided in two. And I said before here, 4% of the people support guerrilla. 1960% of the people of Colombia don't support guerrilla. So we don't have a civil war. We have an internal conflict for the last 40 years. Other thing that impact me is that guerrilla controls 60 or 40% of the Colombian territory. That's not true. What is happening is that in these type of operations, they go hit and run, maybe in 40% of the territory, but they're not controlling 40% of the Colombian territory. The army is controlling the whole Colombian territory, except the demilitarized zone in the south part of this country that we have the agreement to start these conversations. So I think that this is something that has to be very clear to the United States. This is not Vietnam. We're not in a civil war, and there's not going to be any foreign military intervention in this country while I am president of Colombia.
I promise one last question.
Yes.
Would the FARC exist if it were not for the drug trade?
Now, I think it was very difficult because I don't.
If you could give me a full statement, because my questions
Okay.
get cut out.
Yes. I think that the FARC could not survive right now if they don't have the support of drug money involved in their operations. It's very difficult for a movement that has between 15 to 20,000 people to survive without, as they have said, with the drug money involved in their operations.
Good.